not able to move forward my slides. Yeah. Now, what are insulin sensitizers? Yeah. There's some problem. I can't move my slides. Yeah, any drug that improves the sensitivity of the cells to the metabolic effects of the insulin is an insulin sensitizer. We have few drugs such as biguanides and other categories, thiazolidine diones, which include ioglitazone and rosiglitazone, and the third category is inositols, which include myoinositol and D-caroinositol. Now, what is insulin resistance and how is it associated with PCOS? Insulin resistance is observed in 20-30% of the non-obese women and 70 to 80% of the obese women with PCOS. 75% of the PCOS patients in India suffer from insulin resistance. There's some problem with the slides. I'm not able to control myself. Can you please look into it? Okay. Thank you, Nehal. Yeah, there's some specific abnormalities of insulin metabolism identified in the PCOS women, and that include there's impaired suppression of hepatic gluconeogenesis, there are abnormalities in insulin receptor signaling, and there's disturbed insulin-mediated glucose transport into the muscle. And all these lead to hyperglycemia, followed by compensatory hyperinsulinemia. Now, with hyperinsulinemia, we have decreased SPG levels, which cause increase in free androgens, and the increased IGF-1 levels, which cause increase in ovarian androgens. And all these result in oligo or anovulation, hyperandrogenism, and we have PCO picture on ultrasound. By serine kinase phosphorylation, and therefore the metabolic pathway gets disturbed, which leads to insulin resistance in skeletal muscle, liver, and adipose tissue, and the mitogenic pathway activity increases due to excess availability of insulin and compensatory hyperinsulinemia. So there's an increased responsiveness of ovary to insulin, contrary to the resistance of the rest of the body. This results in ovarian hyperandrogenemia. Insulin is also responsible for maturation arrest and atresia of the ovarian follicles, leading to deficiency of aromatase activity, which in turn further aggravates hyperandrogenemia. What are the effects of insulin resistance on the endometrium? There are a few surrogate markers for endometrial function, like glycogen and insulin-like growth factor binding protein 1. The levels of insulin growth The levels of IGF-B1 production are decreased in women with PCOS, and the expression of glycodelin and IGF-BP during pregnancy are also suppressed in PCOS compared with normal women. There are different ways to measure insulin resistance, like IVGTT, IgT, fasting plasma insulin levels, HOMA, and Quickie. But should we actually be measuring insulin resistance? The conclusion was that probably it's impractical, maybe even counterproductive. So, coming into the consensus of infertility treatment in PCOS, we have different modalities. and lines of treatment, but I'll be discussing mainly the role of insulin sensitizers. According to ESHRE, ACOG and NICE 2018 guidelines, they concluded that the use should be restricted to the patients who have glucose intolerance or type 2 diabetes. Bigunide, the metformin, was used as a treatment option for PCOS in 26 women in 1994 for the first time. There has been extensive research on this molecule since then. Thiazolidine thiols, they improve insulin signaling and enhance peripheral glucose uptake. But there is no reduction in the insulin levels. There's also predisposition for weight gain, and there are some significant side effects like cardiovascular events, hepatotoxicity, anemia, edema, and even bladder carcinoma. The most recent ones are the inositols, which are the carbohydrates which are found in body and food supplements. They play an important role in insulin metabolism. They use the first controlled trial of inositols in PCOS was published in 1999. And myoinositol and D-chiroinositol work as specific modulators of intracellular second messenger activated by insulin linkage with its own membrane receptor. What we actually know about metformin is that it works by improving the sensitivity of the peripheral tissues to the insulin, which results in the reduction of circulating insulin levels. It also inhibits hepatic gluconeogenesis and increases the glucose uptake by the peripheral tissues. It also has a positive effect on the endothelium and adipose tissue. Of it, starting doses of metformin of 500 milligrams per day, and we can go up to 2000 milligrams divided depending on the tolerance and side effects. So, in insulin resistance and obese patients, we have different endocrine manifestations which result in increased androgen activity, and they may clinically present to us with infertility, menstrual disturbances, or even hirsutism. And the metabolic manifestations may present with glucose intolerance, dyslipidemia, or vascular dysfunction, which in long run may lead to vascular disease. So metformin acts on both by decreasing the endocrine and the metabolic manifestations. It acts on the liver and decreases gluconeogenesis and increases insulin sensitivity, thereby decreasing the hepatic glucose output. In the muscles, it acts by increasing the glucose transport and also increases insulin sensitivity, decreases the intestinal absorption of glucose. In the pancreas, there's no direct effect on insulin secretion, it's quite safe. And in the ovary, it decreases the androgen secretion. How does metformin decrease the androgen levels? There is intrinsic alteration of the follicle steroidogenesis through the insulin growth factor 1 pathway in the granulosa cells. There is direct inhibition of androgen production in the theca cells. There is reduction of the adrenal steroidogenesis in response to ACTH hormone, and it also has a central action on the pituitary gland with LH lowering and prolactin levels in women with PCO. In the Cochrane review by Taling et al. In 2010, there were 27 trials using metformin, which concluded that reduction of miscarriage in PCOS women with their use, and also there's a reduction of pregnancy complications, and there's reduction of cardiometabolic risks. In this review, published in 2016, when metformin was used as a single agent, it was concluded that it is better than the placebo or no treatment. And there was need for less invasive monitoring. Another study which studied the effectiveness of inositol and metformin on infertile PCO women who are resistant to letrozole. In this study, there were 150 patients, and they were respond to 7.5 milligram of letrozole for 5 days. They were divided into 3 groups. Group 1 received only folic acid 200 micrograms. Group 2 received 1500 milligrams of metformin along with folic acid. And group 3 received 2 grams of inocetal along with folic acid for 3 months. And in the last cycle, they gave 75 milligram letrozole for ovulation induction. The parameters studied were the ovarian function and the pregnancy rate. And they concluded that the addition of inocetal and metformin to the treatment of infertile PCOS women with letrozole resistance improves the ovarian function, but that was not very significant. But it showed that inocetal was more effective than metformin in patients with normal BMI. In this study, the effects of metformin were studied in comparison with CC. And the key points were when metformin was used versus placebo or no treatment, it was shown that the live birth rate with placebo was 19%, and that would be between 90 to 37% with metformin. Women taking metformin also were more likely to get pregnant, and they were more likely to ovulate. When metformin was used with CC versus CC alone, the results were that the live birth rate with CC alone is 24%, which may change to 23 to 34% with metformin and CC combined. The pregnancy rates and ovulation rates also improved when both metformin and CC were used. The third parameter they compared was metformin alone with versus CC in both obese and non-obese patients. In the obese women, obese women have a lower birth rate with metformin, while non-obese women showed a possible benefit from metformin. The live birth rates of non-obese women with CC is 26%, which increased to 26 to 50% with metformin. However, obese women, the live birth rate is 22%, which will decrease to between 5 to 13% with metformin. So, with more severe insulin resistance in obese, they are less amenable to insulin sensitizing drug monotherapy. In CC-resistant PCOS, metformin plus CC significantly increased the likelihood of ovulation as compared with CC alone, and there was superiority of combined treatment in terms of clinical pregnancy, but not in live birth rates. Metformin plus CC would be considered in the management protocol of the patient with CC resistant, and that more attempts with metformin plus CC are warranted when the access to gonadotropins is limited. What are the other therapies in CC resistant patients? Metformin versus laparoscopic ovarian drilling. There was superiority of metformin over laparoscopic ovarian drilling in clinical pregnancies and live birth rates. There was superiority of gonadotropins over metformin plus clomiphene citrate in terms of ovulation. And there was superiority of metformin plus clomiphene citrate over N-acetylcysteine plus clomiphene citrate in terms of ovulation and clinical pregnancy. When metformin was used with gonadotropins in IUI, this meta-analysis demonstrated that adding metformin resulted in significant improvements in clinical pregnancies and live birth rates. There was significant reduction in the cancellation rates, and we required lower doses of gonadotropins and duration of stimulation. When used in IVF, though there was no improvement in clinical pregnancy and live birth rates, but there was significant reduction in the risk of ovulation because it ameliorates the VEGF levels. There's additional significant benefits of increased implantation rate and decreased spontaneous abortion rates. This seemed to be influenced by higher metformin doses, and when it was given for longer durations. There was a reduction of ovarian hyperstimulation from 27% to 6 to 15% when metformin was used. Use of insulin sensitizers in androgen excess is limited as compared with OCPs, and meta-analysis shows that there is no benefit in adding metformin to improve hirsutism and acne. Effect on the metabolic parameters. There is insufficient data as of now on the efficacy of insulin sensitizing drugs for long-term prevention of diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and endometrial carcinoma. Coming to inositols. Insulin signaling requires activation of inositol phosphoglycans, which are released as second messengers in response to binding. Inositol, the predominant form of inositol in the ovary, good quality oocyte. Different molecules. Now, in this slide, it shows how the insulin imbalance results in insulin resistance. When the activity of the epimerase enzyme is decreased, it leads to decrease in DCI-IP complex, which results in insulin resistance. And with the increase in epimerase activity, there is decrease in the levels of mannitol IPG complex, which results in oligo or anovulation. There are specific roles of mannitol and D-chiroinositol. D-chiroinositol has high concentration at the peripheral tissues and increases glycogen synthesis, reduces compensatory insulin production and hyperinsulinemia. Mannitol, on the other hand, has high concentration in the ovary and specifically in the follicular fluid. It acts at ovary mainly but also in the peripheral tissues. It increases cellular glucose uptake. It acts as a second messenger for FSH signaling and thereby reduces FSH requirement. And mannitol supplementation have improved the oocyte quality and also the oocyte maturation rates. The ideal physiological plasma ratio of mannitol and D-chiroinositol is 40:1, which results in effective glucose uptake and utilization, resulting in normal insulin sensitivity. But what happens in PCOS is that this physiological ratio is altered, which then results in poor glucose uptake and utilization, resulting in insulin resistance and compensatory hyperinsulinemia, which have the effects of hyperandrogenism, hormonal imbalance, irregular menstrual cycles, and ovulatory dysfunction. Mannitol helps in oogenesis and oocyte maturation, especially by increasing the intracellular calcium concentrations, which help both in nuclear and plasmic maturation of the oocyte. In this Journal of Reproductive Sciences, it revealed that the altered mannitol or D-chiroinositol ratio might be one of the etiological factors or consequence of PCOS. Hyperinsulinemia in PCOS women presents with an enhanced MI to DI epimerization in the ovary and leads to MI deficiency that impairs the FSH signaling, resulting in reduced oocyte quality. This was a study published in Endocrine Connection 2017, which compared the results of supplementing only MI or the DCI with MI. So this study showed the DCI paradox, which hypothesizes that only mannitol has a beneficial effect on the ovary. Therefore, DCI supplementation alone is not recommended for several reasons, because high doses of D-chiroinositol per day are considered to be toxic to ovaries and oocyte maturation. DCI is not converted into mannitol, and therefore the specific action of the mannitol is lost, and mannitol and mannitol IP deficiencies are correlated with many insulin-resistant conditions. The second important part which the study highlighted was that metformin, when it was used as anti-diabetic drug, it improves the insulin sensitivity in the obese women with PCOS by restoring an inositol-based signaling. Now, what are the effects of administration of mannitol on ovarian function? It showed that it has improved ovarian functioning by improving the oocyte quality and pregnancy rates in PCOS patients significantly. Coming to the menstrual irregularities, it was concluded that D-chiroinositol, when given over a period of 12 months, significantly improved insulin resistance, menstrual cycle regularity, decreased incidence of oligomenorrhea and amenorrhea in PCOS. At the ovarian level, only mannitol improves the oocyte quality because it is FSH second messenger. It increases FSH signaling and improves oocyte quality and maturation, and it has the ability to reduce the recombinant FSH doses. So overall, mannitol increases the insulin sensitivity, decreases insulin resistance, it improves glucose utilization, it leads to decreased levels of free and serum testosterone, provides good quality oocytes, improves pregnancy rates, and also restores menstruation and normal ovulation. Coming on to the metabolic parameters, it was found that there is significant reduction in total and free testosterone levels with a supplementation of inositols. Now, this was a study which showed the effect of mannitol alone and when on the combined treatment with D-chiro and mannitol in the physiological ratio. It was a double-blind randomized controlled trial which included 50 patients. They were divided in two groups. The first group had 24 patients who received only 2 grams of mannitol twice daily, and the second group received both mannitol and D-chiro in the ratio of 40:1 twice daily. The endpoint which was studied were fasting insulin, glucose, insulin resistance, total and free testosterone, and SHBG levels. And the study was done over a period of 24 weeks, which concluded that when we studied the fasting glucose and insulin levels, there was substantial decrease over a period of 24 weeks in the group which received minoxidil and D-chironostol both. And also there was a reduction in total and free testosterone levels and increase in SHBG levels. So we can say that minoxidil improves the lipoprotein profile. They are found to induce ovulation in 72%, and the clinical pregnancy rates improved by 40%. There was 44% reduction in the severe hirsutism cases, and in 30% cases, hirsutism disappeared. There was also a reduction in gestational diabetes. Both the total recombinant FSH and the number of stimulation days were significantly reduced. In the group treated with combination of minoxidil plus folic acid, the number of immature oocytes and degenerated oocytes was significantly reduced. When minoxidil, this study showed that when minoxidil alone is used in combination with CC in the patient with insulin resistance, it ameliorates insulin resistance and body weight and improves the ovarian activity in PCOS patients. The safety issues when we use this insulin sensitizing drugs. The side effects are mainly gastrointestinal, which include nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, diarrhea, indigestion, and metabolic acidosis, which is more with metformin. Safety during first trimester of pregnancy is reassuring. In a recent meta-analysis of 9 control studies, there was no evidence of increased risk of major birth defects in the women with PCOS who underwent metformin treatment during the first trimester. In the women with PCOS treated with metformin, there is activation of the embryonic PK, which might account for improved pregnancy outcomes. They might be useful to reduce miscarriage and occurrence of gestational diabetes. There's not been found to have any adverse effect on the children during the first few years of life. Coming to inositol safety, minoxidil supplementation is well tolerated and safe. A daily dose of up to 18 grams per day for 3 months did not induce any significant adverse effect. Mainly for in PCOS women, we usually use 4 grams per day. Side effects are usually mild and mainly gastrointestinal, and the severity of adverse effect did not increase with increasing the dose of minoxidil. So to conclude, clomiphene citrate. Insulin resistance is a key to pathogenesis of PCOS. There is no role of measuring insulin resistance. What we can measure is just oral glucose tolerance test, especially in the patients who have higher BMI. Sensitivity helps to improve insulin sensitizers help to improve insulin sensitivity and reduce insulin levels. Metformin can be used as a first-line agent either alone or combination with CC. In CC-resistant patients, we can either use letrozole or combine treatment with CC and metformin. We can use gonadotropins or LOD. Insulin sensitizers, especially metformin, have beneficial effects in reducing the incidence of ovarian hyperstimulation. There is not much evidence to support their use in hirsutism, and there is insufficient data on efficacy of insulin-sensitizing drugs for long-term prevention of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and endometrial carcinoma. Newer insulin sensitizers like minoxidil and D-chiro have great potential for use in PCOS, and there is some evidence as to their benefit in improving various reproductive and metabolic parameters. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Rija. So all of you have heard for this wonderful basket of drugs which are being used in infertility. And we come to our last topic for today, which is by Dr. Keshav Malhotra on antioxidants in male infertility. Yes.
All right. So we've had a wonderful discussion on all the drugs that can be used in infertility, and I'm going to be talking about male infertility a bit. I know that we have almost crossed our time, which is 2 hours, but thank you so much to everyone who was still sticking with us and for this masterclass. So without wasting much time, let's move on to our topic. So we know that in the last 70 years, there has been almost a 20% drop in sperm volume, and there's been probably a 58% decline in the sperm production. Now, when you go back and analyze those past 70 years, the major things that have changed as far as male fertility or male fertility is concerned is probably that we now have a very stricter criteria to actually analyze these parameters, which we have the WHO 5th edition and also the Kruger's criteria. But one thing that has also changed is that the dietary pattern, the food, nutrients, etc., that has changed quite a bit. And this is one meta-analysis which actually identified almost, there were 2,000 articles based on male nutrition, out of which 35 were selected, and they actually indicated that men who were taking diets rich in nutrients like omega-3 fatty acids, antioxidants like vitamin E, vitamin C, beta-carotene, selenium, zinc, etc., they had a better chance of fecundity as compared to men who were deficient. Actually changing. Now, why is this happening? Because we know from literature, we know from science that the male gamete, which is the sperm, is also equally responsible for creating a live birth. Now, if the sperm does not deliver a correct complement of chromosomes to the egg, or the DNA of the sperm is impaired, then it's not going to actually give you a good pregnancy. Now, there are a lot of studies which actually compare sperm DNA damage with the results. So first, let us understand the kind of cases where sperm DNA damage might be higher. Now, if you have a man who is more than 40 years of age, that person might have a higher sperm DNA fragmentation. If the person has a lifestyle history of smoking, alcoholism, is obese or is having a poor diet, is stressed or is working in a very high heat environment, maybe has a varicocele, etc., has been exposed to radiation, again taking some kind of drugs, recreational drugs or medications, these are all indications where sperm DNA fragmentation might be higher, and these are things that should be covered in the history taking of that patient. Now, why is this sperm DNA damage important? Because we know that sperm DNA fragmentation has an effect on right from embryonic development to early post-implantation to even late miscarriages. At all these stages, the sperm DNA is a contributory factor. And these are things that we have to now start thinking about. Now, the major reason for sperm DNA damage has thought to be the imbalance between the reactive oxygen species that are present in the seminal plasma and the antioxidants that are able to detoxify those reactive oxygen species. Now, let's try and understand a little bit about the physiology of ROS. Now, ROS in certain biological limits is essential because it actually supports spermatogenesis. Now, in the early stages of spermatogenesis, reactive oxygen species are actually going to help in chromatin compaction. It's also going to help the sperm in capacitation. It's going to help the sperm in completing acrosomal reaction, also improves motility, etc. Now, it also acts within the leukocytes, and when we talk about the leukocytes itself, it acts as a defense mechanism in those kind of infections. So reactive oxygen species are very, very important in natural biological limits. And this is where empirical antioxidant therapy is something that should not be offered, because they tend to reduce those reactive oxygen species and actually ends up in affecting the spermatogenesis process itself. Now, there are a lot of studies which I've mentioned in the past few slides, but this was another one which I wanted to mention because this is a meta-analysis which actually compared sperm DNA fragmentation with IUI outcomes. Now, I know quite a lot of you who are attending this masterclass would be doing IUIs, and even if you're doing an IUI, if the patient has a DFI less than 30%, those patients have a good statistical probability of obtaining a pregnancy, which is same as a normal couple. But if the DFI is higher in those cases, you might need to think about adding antioxidants. Right. So when I come to the mechanism of action of ROS, now if you look at the ROS right here in the slide, this affects each and every stage of spermatogenesis. So it's going to affect the spermatogenesis process itself. It's going to affect the sperms which are present in the plasma or in the ejaculate, which are actually collecting in the epididymis. And what it does is that it will go and damage the lipid bilayer of the sperm. It makes it permeable, and such sperms, or the whole mechanism is a vicious cycle, because these sperms are going to die, and once they die, they produce more ROS, and it's again a very vicious cycle, and ultimately decreases the fertility of that man. Now, when I talk about the certain alterations in the sperm DNA, we have to understand that the oocyte has a repair capacity to actually correct those single strand breaks or even double strand breaks which are present in the sperm. And we actually had a live session on how the oocyte actually repairs sperm DNA damage. So if you want to listen to it, you can go back to our Facebook page of this presentation. But understand here that the egg has a repair capacity. So not all of these men are going to come with adverse outcomes. Not all of these men are going to come with miscarriage, etc. But as age increases, we have to really understand. I'm not sure who's changing my slides. Please, can you please stop that? So as age increases, what has to be understood here is that the capacity of the oocyte to repair the DNA damage is lost. And this is where most of those abnormal parameters or most of those abnormal outcomes will come. So let's try and understand all of these medications which now help improve the sperm quality. Now, before we move on to the medicines, or before we move on to the supplements that are used, we have to understand that all of these act on the mitochondria. Now, the sperm mitochondria is the only energy source which is present within the sperm, and it actually supports the motility, it supports the DNA, it supports all of the functions of which are present in the sperm. So anything that is going to be targeted on the sperm has to target the sperm mitochondria. Now, this is a nice image of a sperm which has normal mitochondria. So if you look at the first image right here, figure 1, you can see this is the normal structure of the mitochondria which is present within the neck of the sperm. And when you compare it to a sperm which has been exposed to ROS, now you look at the number of mitochondria which are present and also the shape of the mitochondria which is present. Both of these factors get distorted. And this is how ROS basically affects the sperm function. So all of the antioxidants which are present at the moment are classified as mitochondrial medicine, and I have actually in the range of, so you have CoQ10, which is one of the most common antioxidants which is available, and its key role in male subfertility is basically is going to improve the mitochondrial content. It also acts as an antioxidant, so it's going to target the ROS which is present in the plasma. It also improves other sperm parameters like a little bit of morphology might improve, the motility might improve, etc., etc. L-carnitine acts as improving the mitochondrial reserve of the sperm, and it also improves the morphology as well as the motility. Lycopene again is an antioxidant, is going to counteract the ROS, may improve certain sperm parameters, and similarly. So these are all the different kind of antioxidants which are present, and I will cover a lot of them in my presentation today. So we'll start with CoQ10. I know Niharika has already given you an introduction about CoQ10. So what we're trying to understand here is that CoQ10 is a very important molecule in the respiratory chain or the respiratory transport chain of a cell. And this is for each and every cell which is present in the body, for the oocyte as well, for the egg, embryo, etc., etc. So if you can see these images right here, CoQ10 actually is on the membrane, and it actually helps in transport of the ATP within the cell. So that's the major function of CoQ10. Now let's look at some of the studies which have been actually done for CoQ10. So I'm going to start with an old study which is from 1994 onwards, and so this study was basically CoQ10 concentrations in normal as well as pathological human seminal fluids. And they actually found that men who had a impaired sperm count, had an impaired sperm motility, had a lower amount of coenzyme Q10 present in the seminal plasma. Compound might actually be in male subfertility or actually improving male subfertility. From there, we go on to the supplementation of CoQ10 and its basic effect as an antioxidant and also in reducing oxidative stress. So this was a double-blind randomized controlled trial where 16 men were actually taken into consideration, and all of them had idiopathic OATs. They received 200 milligrams a day of CoQ10 or a placebo for 3 months. So what we want to understand here is that a minimum supplementation of 3 months is necessary because that's the duration of the spermatogenesis cycle. What we would want to advise, or what the ideal situation would be, to actually do it for 2 cycles of spermatogenesis, which is about 6 months. So when we go to this slide, there was a significant positive correlation between CoQ10 concentrations. Can someone please stop changing the slides? So there was a significant positive correlation between CoQ10 and the normal sperm morphology. And in 3 months supplementation of CoQ10, a result as far as the semen parameters and the antioxidant enzyme activities were concerned. Now, this is another study which basically takes into consideration ubiquinol and ubiquinone, which are basically the active forms of CoQ10. And they actually found out that both of these had a good significant correlation as far as improving the fertility is concerned. Again, there are multiple studies which are reported in literature. So like this is another study which actually compared CoQ10 with alpha tocopherol and measured the oxidative stress in the plasma, and that's something that reduced. If you look at the sperm density, that increased from 17 million to 24 million, and the pathology or the morphology actually improved as far as the abnormal forms are concerned. So that dropped from 47% to 35%. Now, we move on to the next drug which is present here, and that's L-carnitine. Now, this is a really good paper which actually came out, which actually compared the effects of L-carnitine with varicocelectomy. Now, a lot of your patients would have varicoceles, would have grade 1, grade 2 varicoceles. And this study found out that if you are supplementing these men who have a grade 1 or a grade 2 varicocele with L-carnitine, it actually shows. So in these patients, this supplementation could be used as an alternative to surgery, and that's quite a major chunk of expense that you might save for that patient. Also, you're saving the patient from an invasive procedure. We know that if it's a very small varicocele, it really does not need any surgical treatment. So unless and until the varicocele is symptomatic or is a grade 3 varicocele, only in those cases surgery is indicated. But in other cases, you can actually manage those outcomes with antioxidants and with the other kind of add-ons which are available in the ART industry. So these are things that could be thought for your patients. Now, apart from the basic benefit of increasing the sperm parameters, carnitine in the epididymis actually goes to more than 2,000 times than that of the blood serum. So it's a very good product which actually passes through the blood testis barrier and reaches the epididymis. So that's also something that we have to really consider. And it has a function not only on the sperm parameters but also on the performance or the erectile function of the man. So these are things that could be considered as far as L-carnitine supplementation is concerned. Now, another new product which is available, or another new drug which is available, is astaxanthin, and this is in the market. And what this is actually one of the most potent or the strongest antioxidant which is available, and it significantly decreases the RS production inside seminal plasma. And there have been studies which have actually seen, I'm going to show you a few slides here. So this is a study which actually showed sperms, and they actually put different concentrations of astaxanthin into the seminal plasma. And if you notice, E is the one which is the exact the concentration of astaxanthin, which was 2 microliters inside the seminal plasma, which was actually incorporated. And this showed that most of the sperms, so the green lines that you see are capacitated sperms. In this slide, we see that most of the sperms which received this supplementation actually underwent capacitation. So, and this capacitation is a very important process as far as fertilization is concerned. So these are things that could be introduced into the supplementation of the man. Another antioxidant which is available, or another drug which is available, is lycopene. And lycopene, like I mentioned in the previous slide, does affect the sperm parameters. So it's going to actually improve the sperm motility. It can improve sperm vitality as well, and it reduces the apoptosis of sperm, and that's how it's actually going to affect the basic male fertility. So these are things that we have to understand. And what you want to do here is that you want to segregate your patients based on what kind of parameters that they present with. So if I have a person who presents with normal sperm morphology, normal sperm parameters, but a very high DNA fragmentation index, in those situations, now I'm thinking that all the parameters are normal. I don't need lycopene, I don't need L-carnitine. In these situations, coenzyme Q10 or astaxanthin would be my treatment of choice. But if I have a patient which has like a decreased sperm motility or has like decreased viability as well, in those cases, I would choose CoQ10 with lycopene or L-carnitine as a supplement. So I'll use that in combination. I'll also think about the pharmacoeconomics of the patient. So if the patient is affording, then I'll be using astaxanthin. If the patient is non-affording, or if the patient is from a poorer background, then I'll think of maybe using vitamin C, vitamin E, and zinc, which are easily available and can also have good results as far as the antioxidant effect is concerned in the seminal plasma. Now, zinc is one more drug which I mentioned earlier, and zinc is a very versatile drug because it actually affects, or it actually has an effect on a lot of different things as spermatogenesis is concerned. So it's not just the prostatic secretions, it's also going to help in the seminal fluid secretions or the seminal vesicle secretions. So it's a very good drug to be included as a combination. So now, if I think of like a patient who has a very low semen volume, in those cases, I would want to supplement that patient with zinc as well. If I have a patient where the viscosity is too high, or it's not liquefying, in those cases also zinc is going to help that patient. So these are ways where you can actually segregate your patients and then decide which antioxidant you would want to use in which category of patient. Now, I have the latest Cochrane review which came out in 2019. So before, like even till last year, we were all of the idea, or we all had the notion that antioxidants have effect on male fertility, and this was one place where I also debated very ferociously, where people were giving antioxidants left, right, and center, and it was actually not showing a significant result on male subfertility. But the latest Cochrane review says otherwise. So this Cochrane review came in 2019, and it has shown that men who are at a higher risk. Now, when I say high risk, it's mainly men who have positive lifestyle parameters, men who have like positive seminal parameters like poor motility, poor morphology, poor counts, etc. So all those men who were of this high risk category actually showed a benefit with
फ्रायडे यो फ्रायडे तुजे फुडल्या वीका फुडल्या वीक शेनवारा येवपी हांव जमतलें हांव फाल्यां बरो फुडल्या वीक शेनवारा जाता
या
मात तरी प्लस पॉयंट दिसता